Well, I am so happy to meet you. Our friend Fran Hauser introduced us. And I always say any friend of Fran's is a friend of mine. She's a really special person.
Same here. Absolutely. Love Fran so much.
So you are an entrepreneur, but I was very interested to learn that you're also a relationship wellness expert. So tell me a little bit about what you study.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's kind of the genesis for why I got into this company in the first place. So, what I study is basically just relationships and how they affect our mental and emotional and physical health. There's something called the loneliness epidemic at work in the United States today. I did not make that term up, it was coined by Surgeon General Vivek Murthy. And he started talking about this way back in like 2017. So this really predates COVID, but basically just the idea that we are now lonelier, not just we millennials, but sort of American society at large is a lot lonelier than we've ever been at any point in our history to date. And that has a whole bunch of different reasons behind it. You know, the organizations of our communities, how we leave our communities of origin as we grow in ways that we didn't before. But those ties that bind are just so incredibly important and such a rich area for study.
One of my favorite books I read in college was Bowling Alone by Robert Putnam.
Oh, yeah.
And basically the ethos of it and the title Bowling Alone means that in America in the 50s, we had bowling leagues, and every Wednesday night or Thursday night, people would get together and they'd bring their balls and they had team shirts and they would bowl together.
Yeah.
And now society has changed and everything is so individualized. And he kind of in the book, he talks about the breakdown of American community, American society. When you look at loneliness, what do you think has contributed to our isolation over the last 50, 60 years?
I think it's so much. I think a big part of it is just like the larger societal patterns that individual people don't necessarily feel like they control, but when you look at them, we all sort of assume that that is the way that life is going to go. So what I mean by that is, you know, I'm a perfect example. I'm sort of patient zero, right? I grew up in Los Angeles. And then throughout the rest of my adult life, I went to law school in Boston and then came back, and then I moved to New York, and I've done all sorts of different careers. I've moved for partners and for jobs and graduate school. And most of the people who are in my cohort have done the same thing. And so we find ourselves, you know, in our 30s and our 40s, you know, having children, starting families, but we're all just so scattered. Like everybody that you love is just across the entire United States, if not the world. You know, some people go global. So
Right.
I think it's a whole host of factors, but it kind of comes down to globalization, and movement is such a wonderful thing because it opens the doors for everybody, but it does tend to have that unfortunate underside, which is lessening the structures that used to keep us together that we took for granted.
Yeah. It feels counterintuitive because you think like I can jump on an airplane and get to my friend in New York faster.
Right.
Uh, but you're right. It has, we're all in these silos now more so.
Yeah, and I mean, modern travel obviously is amazing for that, but relationships we're seeing tend to be more dictated by who you're actually around. They're dictated by proximity more often than they're dictated by depth of feeling. Like if you were to name the 5 people that you care most about in life and the 5 that you see most often, I'm sure there's some overlap on that list, but it wouldn't be a completely overshadowed Venn diagram.
No,
So I think that's true for so many people.
you're right. Cause I even think of my grandparents. They came to Chicago, lived in Chicago. My parents went to school in Illinois, live in Chicago, and I was the first one to leave. I live in LA. And so you're right. Like I care about them. They're on my list of 5 for sure.
Yeah,
And yet we're far.
it's
Uh,
so
so I was interested to read that the idea of extreme social isolation was really close to your heart. You went to Harvard Law School, and I read that you experienced it while you were there. So, what did it open your eyes to?
It was honestly crazy. So I actually started out as a ballet dancer. I was a dancer for pretty much all of my life. And so I was moving and interacting with other people. Like you can't be a dancer in isolation, right? So
Yeah.
that was what I was going into life thinking was the norm. Then I got to Harvard Law School and I was, studying. It honestly was even after that when I was practicing at the international law firm that I went to afterwards. We're sort of like sold this dream of success, right? Like you're going to get this fantastic office with the mahogany desk and your nameplate, and it's going to be amazing. And like day two, I knew that I had made a huge mistake because I was sitting behind that desk working incredibly long hours and talk to anyone. I mean, you have your sort of group, your cohort that you go through your law internship with. And then, of course, I saw the other people at the firm that I worked with, not as much as you would think. And you're just realizing that like this golden dream of like all the money and the prestigious career means that like the bulk of your waking hours, you're by yourself. And so, even though I think law is an incredibly noble career, and I'm so glad to have had that experience, that was kind of my first like light bulb moment that success on paper often can lead, successful professionals to be really, really isolated in the day to day.
I mean, this was so prominent on your heart that you started a company around it. So, your company is called Small Packages. You started in 2018, and you let customers craft custom gift boxes for different occasions. So, some are for the happier times, some are for more challenging times. What were you seeing that made you know there was such a need here?
Yeah, absolutely. So the big thing was I couldn't go. I couldn't be there in person for all of these big events, right? So when you're responsible for billing, a gazillion hours a month, that not just the wedding, but the baby shower or that like random Thursday night when someone's broken up with their boyfriend and they just want to sit on the couch with you and drink wine and talk about life, like most of those things I couldn't get to. And so I wanted to have a way to show up tangibly for those people in my life and let them know, like, okay, I can't be there in person, but I'm really thinking about you. This relationship is so important to me. But I also didn't have the time to do the legwork of like putting something together. And, I didn't have time to go to Anthropology and be like looking for candles and
Right.
making it attractive. So I kind of just looked around online for other solutions that were sort of, in keeping with the aesthetics and the values that, we want to stand behind. Just really couldn't find anything. So decided to start it myself.
And so, how do you feel like these small packages combat loneliness?
So they're a way to let people who are incredibly busy but feeling isolated reach out and show up thoughtfully, authentically in the lives of the people that they care about. So our like bestseller is one that's just all about like self-care. So very, you multi-purpose, if somebody's having a birthday or they're having a new baby or whatever it happens to be, it's sort of this like all around way for them to take care of someone else. Our second bestseller is actually the box we call Something Awful, which is, it sounds a little strange to say, but there are so many times in the life of a person you love, they had a death in the family or they had a miscarriage or whatever it happens to be, where you want to show up badly, but you just have no idea what to do or to say, whether it's because you've never been through that experience yourself or
Right.
just trying to do a million things. So they're sort of very guided ways for people to know, if I want to show up, this is an easy, great way to do it.
I think it's interesting. I hear a lot of people talk about isolation with the elderly.
Yeah.
And while I think we all assume that the elderly are likely to feel lonely or isolated, which they are, I was interested to learn that 30% of millennials have reported feelings of either extreme social isolation or loneliness. What does science say in terms of why millennials are feeling so lonely?
I mean, my answer is going to be so obvious, but it's so true. It's technology. It's the fact that we now rely so heavily on social media and just the literal technology of our phones. We get tricked, like we get biologically tricked into thinking that we are connecting with someone when we like an Instagram story or we send them a text. But the biology of connection says the opposite, right? Like you move a relationship forward with somebody when they can hear your voice or they can see your face. And so that's why in the tech that we're building now, we're really focused on intimacy, like biological intimacy, in order to move relationships forward. Because like in a picture, not cutting it.
It's interesting to hear you say that. I thought of two things. One is I definitely feel more connected to people when I'm on FaceTime.
Yeah.
But smell is a big sense for me, and I can't smell them. And I heard Gloria Steinem speak one time, and she said that it's actually hard for humans to feel complete empathy without experiencing all five senses, which I found to be fascinating. So I think that sending a package to somebody hits a lot of those senses.
It's funny that you say that because that's actually part of our sort of like secret sauce, you know, don't tell, of how we curate these things is we make sure that all of those different things are covered, like that there's something tactile, whether it's like warm woolly socks or something else, you know, that there's something to smell, something to eat, to taste, etc., because it really does help replicate. Nothing is gonna take the place of, you know, like what does their sweater smell like, where you're like, oh, this is actually my person. But it does bridge some of that gap for sure.
So I know you mentioned the Surgeon General. In 2018, he called this a public health epidemic. Epidemic's a big word to use for the Surgeon General. Where are we now? How do you think the pandemic shifted things?
I mean, I hate to be a pessimist, but the obvious answer is it's gotten much worse. A lot of people have been barred for several years at this point from having that kind of immediate contact with the people that they love if they are far away. I didn't see my own family in LA for almost a year, which is like unheard of for how we normally do things.
Yeah.
It's starting to get better this year, right? I mean, nobody can say like we're post-pandemic because people are still getting sick. It's getting better. I think the one thing we can sort of like call a silver lining is I think we were all so obsessed with hustle culture or whatever we want to call it before the pandemic that this really was sort of a stop you in your tracks moment. And for people who had been building their lives purely for achievement or the next thing, like we really sort of got reoriented. And there's been a huge investment in the VC community and the founder community and technology, obviously, that helps us connect even when we can't do so in person. But I think we're going to be battling the side effects of this for quite some time. People definitely have suffered because they've been isolated, unfortunately.
The mention of technology feels interesting and confusing to me because in some ways it connects us and in some ways it really isolates us. What do you think the difference is between isolation and loneliness?
That's really interesting. So scientifically, they talk about sort of two different types of loneliness. One is situational and one is chronic. So situational would be a college freshman who is in a new place with people that she doesn't know for the first time. She hasn't made that core group of friends yet. So she's kind of like feeling outside the swing of things, but she has a whole network to call upon. She can call mom that she loves, her best friends who are at other colleges, and she'll eventually move out of it. She's still reaching out. Chronic loneliness is the more sort of insidious, dangerous piece. It happens so much to the elderly, but in lots of other communities too, where it's sort of that learned helplessness behavior where you've been so lonely for so long that you're no longer trying to fix it effectively. Sort of your literal brain chemistry has changed enough that you expect the world to be this way. You expect to move through it alone. So obviously we're doing everything we possibly can to make sure that people stay in category 1 and don't reach category 2.
On a biological level, how does loneliness impact our health?
Oh my gosh, way more than you would expect. There have been so many studies done on it. There was one interesting one that came out by Harvard Business Review, but it affects every single component of your health, right? So I think most people think it stays in the realm of the emotional, right? Like I feel lonely and therefore my emotional health is not great. The physical is actually the part of it that shocked me the most. There was one study done that said if you lose that very close cohort of friends that we all sort of like come up with as we're growing up, if you lose that entirely, it has the same effect on your body as smoking 15 cigarettes a day, which is wild, right? Like we are all now at the point where we know that, you know, lighting up is absolutely terrible for you, but we sort of just go gentle into the good night of thinking that losing those lateral connections is just a normal part of adulthood, but it really doesn't have to be.
And I've heard podcasts and read things with heart surgeons who talk about uh, dying or being in pain from a broken heart, so to speak. And a broken heart really means loneliness.
It really does. Yeah, I'm forgetting off the top of my head exactly what the condition is called, but it really is sort of over stress on your heart because it's pumping so much faster to try to circulate blood to replicate the feeling of somebody else like being close to you, which is just so wild, right? To now be in the stage where we're finding out that there are biological underpinnings to all of these things that we sort of thought were just, you know, on the lighter end of the spectrum.
I don't know what the answer to this is, but I was wondering if loneliness is ever a good thing. Because sometimes the experiences that are good for us are paired with a certain amount of isolation. Not always, but sometimes. I think moving to a new city is an example of that. Quitting a job that's not serving us is an example of that. Sometimes even breaking from a relationship or a friendship. Uh, is it ever positive?
I think it can be in certain doses. I think being outside your comfort zone and having to be self-reliant and sort of testing your mettle can be really formative, fantastic experiences. I think the difference between a situation like that and one where we get really concerned about somebody's mental and physical health are, do you have a support network to lean on if you need to? So yes, go bravely into the unknown, move to the new city, break up with the boyfriend that's not serving you, etc. But do you have that network of people around that you can call at midnight when your resolve starts to weaken a little bit and they can pump you back up and get you ready for whatever is coming next? So I think often people can feel not so lonely even when they're physically away from folks, as long as those true relationships are really strong.
That's a really good distinction. Your Twitter bio says you're working to help people delete Facebook and connect in real life. So we talked a little bit about how social media is hurting technology, actually, you said it in particular, is hurting us in terms of loneliness. Is there a way that we could be utilizing it that could actually be helpful or connective?
Yeah, absolutely. That's what we're working on now, actually, the sort of next iteration of our business. And I think I'm no Luddite. I'm very pro technology. I think the dangerous thing that's been happening with the rise of social media over the past like 10 or 12 years is tech isn't the problem. It's relying on tech to be the connection rather than using tech to facilitate the kinds of connections that we know actually bring people closer together.
Huh.
So, yeah. So, having a relationship that is only I like your TikTok and I follow you on Instagram and, we may exchange a couple of messages like, oh, not really moving it forward, right? But if we can use tech to take out the mental load of remembering everybody's birthday and making it really easy to send that handwritten card and to schedule a phone call and sort of doing all of the manual mental work of keeping relationships strong. If we can use it for
Right.
that, then amazing.
I guess it's like using it versus letting it use us.
Exactly. Right. I mean, there's nothing wrong with using technology to make your relationship stronger. It just can't be the stand in.
So at the beginning of this interview, you said that this sort of demand on your time helped you create this company because uh, you didn't want to leave people feeling unsupported. I'm guessing those connections were important to you in terms of your support network as well. I kept thinking, did starting this company give you back your time? Like, are you able to be with people in person more, or is it a different sort of strain?
I think for a lot of entrepreneurs, it's very much a like the cobbler's children have no shoes kind of a situation. So I'm not gonna lie, being a startup founder definitely is probably as much or if not more work
Right.
than being a big law lawyer. But the great thing is a I spend all day every day creating something that I know is improving the world, and so that's a huge load off my mind. And then the second part is I'm just completely in control of my own schedule and my own time, so
Right.
I can kind of make the physical proximity part of it work a little bit better. So yeah, maybe work until 2 a.m., but I can do it at my parents' dining room table if I want to go see them.
I've been dying to find out what you think about remote work. And I asked this because when I first moved to LA, I didn't have a job. And part of, I think, my happiness came when I did get my first job and was working with people who then became my friends. I had it was called Clever TV, and I worked at this little, it was like a YouTube conglomerate basically. And so it
Cool.
was actually very fun. But um, I had really good friends that I met at work, and those were some of my first, I would say, strong or reliable connections in LA. Um, I look at my cousin who just graduated from college, and because of the pandemic and the shifts we've made, he doesn't have that. He's working from home, and I think it's depressing. But now at the stage I'm at, I could not go to an office every single day. So it's weird. It's like help. And I think that's a whole different thing with, parents and moms in particular, not having flexible work schedules. But tell me your whole take on remote work.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am always going to be a proponent of it because I've seen it work so well in our own situation. So my co-founder Monica and I actually met virtually during the pandemic. We were introduced by a mutual friend. She came on board and became my co-founder, and we worked together in that way for 6 months without ever meeting in person.
Wow.
And so we know from experience it can be pulled off. And because we started that way, we've kept the company going that way. And as we've grown, our CTO lives in Indiana. We hired another wonderful woman who lives in Chicago. And so we've just kept building in that way and supplementing it when we can. So we do sort of roughly quarterly team get together so we can have that sort of like in-person, emotional and physical hit of bonding. So we know that it works at least on a small scale. I think I think it's just tough, you know? I mean, you can build relationships virtually. Of course you can.
It's not the same,
It's,
especially when you're right out of school.
it's not the same. You're totally right. So I don't know. I think it's the trade-off of what you want to prioritize. And I think a lot of people now are prioritizing the relationships with their family and their friends, and remote work lets them have that, right? If you can
Right.
work from anywhere, you can be with, you know, those 5 people that you care about most in the world
That's
more of the
true.
time, right? So I don't know. I don't have the final intelligent thought
I
on that,
feel
but
really conflicted about it.
it's really hard. I think at least how we're trying to approach it is just ultimately leaning on choice, right?
Yeah.
Like, you know what works best for you in your life.
Yeah.
So
On your Twitter page, this post caught my eye. You said, "Why does society tell us that we don't need our friends past a certain age? Why does having it all mean partner, babies, splintering the glass ceiling, but no time for friendships that meant everything to us when we were younger?" So I'm curious as to why you think so many of us put friendship lower on our to-do list of life after a certain age.
yeah, I see it happening in my own crew, right? You know, people are starting to get married, have children. Time is finite, right? And so it really only makes sense that we're going after and spending our time on the things that we get rewarded for, right? You know, I mean, we get accolades at work when we're sort of climbing the corporate ladder in a really impressive way. Of course, the benefits of having a partner and children are like these wonderful, beautiful things. So I'm not denigrating that part of it at all. It's just there's no societal infrastructure that rewards or encourages or supports lateral relationships, right? So in college or just when you're kind of just starting out, you have a roommate, right? Or you have the people that came up with you, and that's just sort of the norm. But as you move through life and you sort of take on these other roles, they fall away, right? Like a group of friends, like on Friends that are like well into their 30s and hanging out in a coffee shop, like it's made up for a reason, right? Like nobody really has that kind of time or that kind of space in their lives unless it's something that you aggressively prioritize. So I think it's less that people don't think it's important, but that it's something that you have to consciously pour resources into.
From a scientific perspective, what value do friendships bring to our life?
Oh man, so much. So a big part of it is just physiological ease, like literally lower stress, lower anxiety, lower inflammation, if you can believe it. And it makes sense because your friends are the people that don't need anything from you except for you, right? In a relationship with a romantic partner, there's a lot of give and take of a certain kind. With your children, you know, they need certain things from you, aging parents, etc. Friends just like want to sit next to you. You know, they don't need anything from you other than just your existence and the back and forth normal relationship of, you know, the give and take of witnessing each other's lives. And so there's a very powerful physical ability to just relax when you're in the presence of somebody who only needs that from you. So I think it's really powerful.
I'm trying to think about what you mean by that because I actually feel as if my friendships require a lot from me and
Hmm.
not in a negative way. Um, I think my really good friends, like I have to pour into them and they pour into me.
Absolutely. And that's what I mean about it taking a lot of resources to prioritize them, right? They
Okay.
definitely need your time. There's a real back and forth in terms of, okay, do you have the emotional capacity to be the person listening to my stuff and then you can give it back to me? So, like any relationship, absolutely, there's a
Right.
lot of give and take. I guess what I mean more specifically is that it's equal, or it should be most of the time, right? You're literally on an equal footing with this other person.
I got what you
There's
mean.
no power dynamic where you have to hold yourself back, or you're really seeking or really supporting in the way that you do those sort of more like vertical relationships.
You know, a lot of people that listen to this podcast, when I do advice episodes with people, will say, how do I meet new friends as an adult? It's a big topic. What's your advice on that?
So my very first piece of advice is don't forget the friends that you already have, even if you're not physically near them. Because I think this is a big part of what happens with people. They move to a new city, or their friends have kids, but they don't yet. And there's this very natural inclination to just sort of like let friendships drift over time. Some
Right.
things you definitely want to cut out of your life. They were a friend for a season or a reason, and it's not a good fit anymore. But we find a lot of people actually just sort of naturally letting go of things that would still be really powerful, wonderful friendships if you just were able to invest in them more. So that would be my first piece, is don't forget the wonderful ones you already have.
Yeah.
Um, but in terms of, moving to a new city, tech has definitely tried to step into this field. There are a lot of apps out there. Bumble BFF really threw its hat in the ring. And I think sometimes those things work wonderfully. They kind of fall victim to a lot of the same problems that regular dating apps do, which is just, they present a field of choice that then we sort of biologically want to turn away from. So like, oh, there's so much out there, I'm flipping, whatever. So I usually find that the best method is just, what are you doing in your normal routine? Pretend you're the most extroverted person slash version of yourself.
Yeah.
Make like one extra effort to say one extra thing to every single person. So it's the barista at the coffee shop, it's the girl next to you in bar class, it's, the person that you noticed at lunch at, the office cantina, but, didn't follow up with, or whatever. We're just so programmed to sort of like go in a rote way along our own path. And we sort of think other people are too, and they don't even want to talk to me, whatever. People are dying for connection. Like,
Right.
you might not make your new best friend at bar class, you're for sure going to make her day. You talk to her and start up like a normal conversation. Oh my God, amazing.
How do you judge the chemistry with a new friend? This is always confusing to me because um, usually the first or second dinner or walk I take with somebody new is not actually that comfortable.
Yeah.
And then those people, if I keep at it, have become really good friends of mine. Um, but that's different for me. Like, at least personally, that's different with dating. If I don't feel a connection on the first or second time I meet somebody, I'm out. So how does it work with friends?
I think that makes a lot of sense, right? Because with a romantic relationship, there's a physiological and sexual element to it that if you're not
I
feeling,
guess you're right. I didn't think about
forget about
that.
it. But with friends, it's sort of interesting. We see the people that are your friends that have been close to you for a really long time, like the people you've known since kindergarten. If you were to like look at them in the harsh light of day today, you might not like have that much in common with them, right? But you are bonded to them through a just
History.
shared history. Exactly. So you can't expect to replicate that with the woman next to you in bar class, right? You don't know
Right.
her from Adam, basically. So as you go through life, we find that the people you strike up friendships with, you start to actually have more in common with them than your older friends, because how else do you come across each other?
Right.
So by definition, if you're meeting in a shared activity, I bumped into you at the farmer's market, we go to the same Peloton class, whatever, you have something to talk about, there's something to hang your hat on. And then I always say go for two, and then pay it two dates
Right.
effectively, right? And then pay attention to sort of like the energetic response after that. If the idea of texting that person to set up a third plan makes you pumped and you're like really into it, amazing. If you're feeling that sort of like heaviness and like, oh, maybe I really should, forget about it. You know, move on to the next.
So listen to your instincts,
Yeah, for sure.
but at least two. I like that. I think two is a good number. After two, you kind of feel it.
Yeah, and you've usually struck up enough conversation topics and sort of like figured out
Right.
enough in those two that you know, like, is there enough to go on, right? Like, is this person going to be fun to keep going with?
So I'm dying to do an episode on female friendship. I think we don't talk about it enough. What have you learned about female friendships since starting your company?
Oh man, how powerful they are. First of all, I remember at the very beginning when I was in the founder moment of like, I pack all the boxes in my apartment at midnight, like that sort of very cliche piece. I was
Yeah.
obviously like writing all of the cards too, because all of the boxes come with a handwritten. I cried every day. Like it was the
Really?
absolute best part of this entire enterprise to see these notes that people would write to each other. And it was everything from, you know, just the incredibly goofy, sweet, clearly in jokes of like, you know, you're turning whatever birthday to these like absolutely pivotal life moments. I still to this day remember one of the first ones I ever did, which was a woman who had lost her husband early in COVID and they had like just gotten married. And it was like this whole group of friends who were like bonding together to send her something. It was COVID, so they couldn't be there either. So it was just a testament to how deeply people care about each other. It's the most amazing thing. The other thing I've learned so far is how powerful the longitudinal relationship is. Because if you think about it, you know, if we're lucky, we find our person and, you know, we're with them for many, many years. But some of the older women that I've met through this, because they're big customers of ours too, say, you know, we've been each other's longest relationship in life. We span marriages and divorces and
Wow.
children. We really are the witnesses to each other's lives. And again, because we don't need anything from each other in the sense that like we're equals, we're really just like, you know, stalwarts going through life together and just whoa, how powerful is that to have people like that in your corner who are just witnessing your life?
That is so beautiful. You gave me chills. You're right. It makes me think of that moment in Sex and the City, which is so cliche, but they're all sitting at the table and I think Charlotte says, "What if you're my soulmate? Like what if these friendships and I think in some ways they are, you know, like to span somebody's life is so special."
It's amazing, honestly. And I think there's something a little bit more like primal to it
Mhm.
also, you know, like when you, I don't know if you've experienced this, but like if you go to like a baby shower or something like that and you eventually sort of devolve into that conversation of like, okay, well, here was my experience and this is what I found and whatever, like you realize like there are moments in life that we go through as women that like no matter how wonderful our, you know, if you're in a heterosexual relationship, and no matter how wonderful our partners are, like they just don't get it. Like they've never lived through it. And it doesn't even have to be something as monumental as childbirth. It can also be anything about what
Yeah.
it's like to walk through the world as a woman at work, on the street, you know, all of these different life experiences that are so crucial to who we are. These other people understand and we can have a bond that's based on that. So that's really powerful too.
The Me Too movement, the inception of it was so interesting to watch as well, because I felt like that exact thing that you just mentioned manifested online in front of our eyes. The hashtag Me Too on Twitter was women sharing their stories with other women. And then all of a sudden, all these other people saw it.
It's wild. I feel like it's happening again right now. I don't know if you've been seeing the story of the Finnish prime minister who was getting all of this backlash about like videos of her dancing at a party surfacing and people saying, oh, let's get a drug test for this woman. And so all of these other women are coming out and saying like, I stand with her, and here are videos of me also being a human being and like dancing, you know, and just, you know, having a rational response to life. And I think, you know, when we were growing up, I think that wasn't quite as public a discourse as it's become since, I think you're right. I think since the Me Too movement sort of kicked off. And since then, I think the like, you know, sisterhood has had a little bit of a resurgence, which is a good thing.
I agree. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Brooke Baldwin's book. It's called Huddle. Have you read it by any chance?
I haven't.
I would love to send you a copy. She was on the podcast when it came out, and it was one of my favorite books I've read in a while. It's a quick read, and each chapter is about the power of women coming together, like how powerful we are in a collective. So good. So for anybody listening, if you missed that episode, read that book, because there's something special happens when women huddle.
I think that sounds amazing. I would love to check it out.
So I do a little rapid fire at the end of every interview. Fill in the blank. The older I get, the less I
worry about what other people think of me.
Woo! I'm trying to get there. Since your company is all about gifting, what's the best gift you've received?
Oh my gosh. I think the best gift that I have received is always going to be plane tickets. Every so often, my parents will just say like, you know, we're not going to do like Christmas or whatever gifts this time. We're just going to make it easier for you to come home. And that always is going to be like the best thing.
I really like that. What about the best gift you think you've given?
Ooh. I'm like a real like experiences person to give and to receive. So I think when I was in my last year of law school, a good friend of mine was giving birth. And so I was able to, at her request, of course, film that for her and put together, you know, a whole video around that experience. So not something you can replicate easily, but a really, really good one. And on the like incredibly superficial side, the new brand dough that came out, we stock them in our boxes. It's sort of like a new like cookie dough and also a Nutella situation.
Sabina, my friend is the owner.
Yes,
yeah,
exactly. If you're looking for just like a really easy go-to that literally everyone loves, that's fantastic.
Oh, I love to hear that. Okay, I do a pretty smart question. I have a card deck of 52 questions at random.
Oh boy. Okay, I'm ready.
Oh no, these aren't open. Okay, hang on one sec.
Oh man. Did you create these yourself?
Yeah, because
amazing.
So I was actually going to ask you what your love language is, because because gifts are one of them. And I was like, this is so interesting. I wonder, but you said you're an experiences person.
I am definitely quality time and words of affirmation. Absolutely.
I like that.
That handwritten note that comes in every box is like the most important part for me, for sure.
I think that's really cool. Sorry, I'm having trouble opening.
No worries at all.
My love language is questions. I feel like it sounds funny, but it's like, I think it amounts to quality time, because it's like someone saying like, I'm really here with you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think also, I mean, not that I want to like take umbrage with the 5, but like, I feel like there is another one, which is sort of like feeling seen, which I think is kind of what you're talking about, right? Like when you are dating somebody and you hear them say to somebody else, well, like, Danielle doesn't really like that, or like, no, Danielle's favorite movie is whatever. And they're not even talking to you. Like, doesn't that like light your heart on fire? I love that.
I love that too. What's even also interesting is if somebody that you're dating says something to you that you don't realize they notice.
Yeah.
That is so special. So the scene thing, I totally agree.
Yeah. If that's one of
Okay,
the choices, I'm picking that.
I love it. Okay, tell me when to stop.
All right. Ready? Stop.
Okay. What would younger you not believe about your life today?
Ooh. Oh boy. Um, she would probably not believe that first of all, I'm not a professional dancer. That would be a real blow.
Once a
But
dancer, always a dancer.
that's true. That's true. I think she probably wouldn't believe that I live in New York because I was a California girl my entire life, but more substantively that I am an entrepreneur. I think I always thought that I would go into public service. I did AmeriCorps right after college. Like I was like really, really focused on that. That's why I went to law school.
Okay.
So this is a big swing from what I thought I would be doing.
What is a book that has changed your life or something you think everybody should read?
I'm just going to go with Vivek Murthy's book. I think that really is just such an incredibly deep look into the loneliness epidemic as a societal issue that I think a lot of people just like still don't give credence to. And he makes a case for it that is much more powerful than anything I could say.
I really like that as well. Okay, the last question that I ask everybody is what is the smartest decision you've ever made?
Leaving my law firm,
Ah!
having the ability to walk away from the sunk
I love that.
costs of like 3 years of law school and all of my student debt and all of the investment that I had made because I knew that it wasn't the career I was meant to pursue.
Yeah.
Best decision of my life. Still would have gone to law school. Loved that, but best decision of my life.
It must come like you must use so many of your skills now as an entrepreneur.
Absolutely. I wasn't the right kind of lawyer. Like I wasn't a corporate lawyer, I was a litigator. So that would have been even more helpful, but even more than just like the body of law knowledge, having gone through law school and worked at a firm like that, there's a degree of grit and a degree of just like, okay, well, everything is figure outable. Like I will just sit down with the syllabus or I'll Google it or I'll do whatever it is that I need to do and
Yeah.
I'll figure it out.